I sat in my truck outside a crumbling brick office building in Gary, staring at the newspaper ad I'd ripped out that morning. The paper was wrinkled and soft from being folded and unfolded too many times. Experienced construction workers needed. 38-hour. Immediate start. The wage jumped out at me like a typo, almost triple what I typically made on jobs around the area. My worn-out Chevy idled roughly in the parking lot while I worked up the nerve to go in. 3 months behind on rent, and Emma needed new school supplies I couldn't afford. The truck's gas gauge hovered just above empty, another problem for another day. I switched off the engine and grabbed my folder with my resume and references, though I doubted anyone paying that kind of money would turn me away. The office building looked like it should have been condemned years ago. Broken concrete steps leading to a glass door with peeling vinyl lettering that read, Asylum Construction, Suite 204. Inside, the lobby smelled like old cigarettes and cheap air freshener. The directory board had missing letters, and half the companies listed probably didn't exist anymore. I took the elevator to the second floor, wondering what kind of legitimate construction company operated out of a place like this. Suite 204 surprised me. The door opened to a reception area that looked nothing like the hallway outside. Fresh paint, new furniture, bright lighting. It was like stepping into a different building. The receptionist looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" "I'm here about the construction job, the newspaper ad." I held up the crumpled piece of paper. "Name?" she asked, fingers hovering over her keyboard. "James Miller." She typed something, then nodded. "Please have a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." I sat in one of the stiff chairs along the wall. The reception area had no personal touches, no plants, no pictures, nothing that suggested actual humans worked here regularly. Just clean, sterile furniture and bare walls. After about 10 minutes, the receptionist stood. "Mr. Miller, this way, please." She led me down a short hallway to a conference room with a long table and uncomfortable-looking chairs. The only decoration was a framed blueprint on the wall that I couldn't make sense of from where I stood. "Wait here," she said, closing the door behind her. I waited, trying not to fidget. My work boots looked dirty against the spotless carpet. The air in the room felt too cold, making me wish I'd worn more than just my flannel shirt. The door opened again a few minutes later, and a man in an expensive suit walked in carrying a thin folder. His clothes probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Mr. Miller," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming in. I'm Mr. Collins." We shook hands, and he sat across from me, opening the folder. "I see you've got 15 years of experience in construction and demolition work," he said, scanning what looked like a copy of my resume. I didn't remember sending it ahead of time. "Yes, sir. Started right out of high school." He nodded. "And you're currently between jobs?" "Been doing small contracts, but nothing steady since Westlake Construction downsized last year." Mr. Collins closed the folder. "Well, Mr. Miller, Elysium Construction has recently taken on a major renovation project that requires skilled workers immediately. We're converting an old state hospital in Hammond into office space." "A hospital?" I asked. "Riverside State Hospital. It's been vacant for some time, but the structure is sound, just needs extensive interior renovation." He paused. "The position pays $38 an hour, 40 hours weekly guaranteed with overtime available at time and a half." I tried to keep my face neutral. That kind of money would pull us out of the hole within weeks. "Why so much?" I asked. "That's way above standard for this area." Mr. Collins smiled thinly. "The location is somewhat remote, and we need reliable workers who can commit to the entire project duration. We've found that competitive compensation reduces turnover." He leaned forward. "Additionally, we offer a $5,000 signing bonus, paid on your first day." My mouth went dry. $5,000 would cover our back rent with enough left over for Emma's school needs and catching up on other bills. "What exactly would I be doing?" I asked. "Initial demolition and prep work, removing old fixtures, clearing debris, preparing spaces for the electrical and plumbing teams. He waved his hand dismissively. Standard renovation tasks for a building of that age and size. Something felt off about how vague he was being, but with those numbers hanging in the air, I wasn't about to press too hard. When would you need me to start? Tomorrow morning, he said. We're on a tight schedule. Tomorrow, I repeated. That's fast. As I said, we need workers immediately. Is that a problem? I thought about our empty refrigerator and the past due notices piling up on the kitchen counter. No problem at all. Excellent. He pushed a contract across the table. Standard employment agreement. I'll need your signature on the marked pages. I flipped through the document, skimming the densely packed text. It looked like boilerplate stuff. Confidentiality clauses, safety protocols, payment terms. The language was technical and full of legal jargon. Under normal circumstances, I might have taken it home to read more carefully, but circumstances weren't normal. We needed the money. I signed where indicated and slid the papers back to him. Mr. Collins checked my signatures, then handed me a key card with the Elysium logo. This will grant you access to the work site. Report to Riverside State Hospital tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp. 8 o'clock, I repeated. Punctuality is critical, Mr. Miller. His tone hardened slightly. Arrive exactly at 8, not earlier, not later. I nodded, trying to ignore the weird emphasis. Got it. He stood and extended his hand again. Welcome to Elysium Construction. The receptionist will provide your new employee packet on your way out. Back in the reception area, the woman handed me a folder containing tax forms and a thin employee handbook. She also gave me directions to the hospital, though I already knew roughly where it was. An old brick building on the outskirts of Hammond that locals sometimes told ghost stories about. Walking back to my truck, I tried to shake off the strange vibe from the interview. The money was too good to pass up, even if something felt not quite right. Maybe I was just being paranoid after months of struggling to find decent work. I started the truck and called Sarah on my cell. She answered on the second ring. How'd it go? She asked, hope evident in her voice. I got it, I said, starting tomorrow. That's great. What's the pay like? I told her the hourly rate and about the signing bonus. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Sarah, you there? Are you serious? She finally asked. Jim, that's amazing. That'll fix everything. Yeah, I said, forcing enthusiasm into my voice. We'll be caught up on bills by the end of the month. What kind of job is it? Renovation work, converting an old building into office space. I kept it vague, just like Mr. Collins had. No need to mention it was a mental hospital. I'm so relieved, she said, her voice catching slightly. I'll tell Emma her dad's got a great new job. She's been worried, you know. Kids pick up on more than we think. Guilt tightened my throat. Emma was only 9, but she'd noticed the tension in the house, the whispered arguments about money, the growing collection of unpaid bills. Tell her I'll take her shopping for school supplies this weekend, I said. After hanging up, I drove home with mixed feelings. The money would solve our immediate problems, but something about Elysium Construction and their urgency didn't sit right. The strict start time, the vague description of the work, the suspiciously high pay, all red flags in normal circumstances. But these weren't normal circumstances. Not when your kid needs things you can't provide and your landlord is threatening eviction. That night, after dinner, I pulled up Riverside State Hospital on my laptop. There wasn't much online, just a few articles about its closure decades ago and some forum posts from urban explorers who'd snuck in to take pictures of the decay. The photos showed long corridors with peeling paint, abandoned patient rooms, and graffiti-covered walls. One shot in particular stuck with me. A dark hallway with a single chair positioned at the end, facing the wall. I closed the laptop and tried to sleep, but my mind kept returning to that image. The empty chair, the dark hallway. And tomorrow, I'd be there at exactly 8 in the morning, doing who knows what for people who were paying way too much for simple renovation work. Sarah slept peacefully beside me, relieved that our financial problems would soon be over. I stared at the ceiling until well past midnight, the image of that abandoned hospital turning over and over in my head. I pulled into the cracked parking lot of Riverside State Hospital at exactly 8 in the morning, following the strict instructions from yesterday's interview. The building loomed ahead, a massive brick structure far more decrepit than I'd imagined from the few photos I'd seen online. It sprawled across several acres, with a main central building flanked by 2 wings that stretched outward like grasping arms. My truck bounced over broken asphalt as I navigated through the weed-choked lot. Broken windows dotted the facade like missing teeth, and ivy crawled up the walls, finding purchase in the crumbling mortar between bricks. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, though large sections had collapsed or been cut away over the years. I parked next to 3 other vehicles, 2 pickup trucks similar to mine and a faded blue sedan that had seen better days. No sign of any official Elysium construction trucks or equipment, which struck me as odd for a major renovation project. The key card Mr. Collins had given me worked on a metal side door that looked recently installed, its clean lines and modern security panel incongruous against the weathered brick. The heavy door swung open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a dimly lit hallway that smelled of mildew, dust, and something else I couldn't quite place. A medicinal scent that had somehow survived decades of abandonment. My work boots echoed on the tile floor as I made my way deeper into the building, following the sound of voices. The hallway opened into what must have been the main lobby, a cavernous space with high ceilings and large windows covered in grime so thick that only narrow beams of morning light penetrated the gloom. 3 men were already there, setting up equipment and sorting through tools. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light as they moved around, their voices echoing in the empty space. "Morning," I called out, stepping into the lobby with my tool bag slung over my shoulder. The nearest worker, a stocky guy with a salt and pepper beard, looked up. "You the new guy?" "Yeah, Jim Miller," I said, setting down my bag and extending my hand. "Mike," he said, giving my hand a quick shake before returning to uncoiling an extension cord. "That's Tony by the windows and Dave over there with the sledgehammer." Tony, a younger guy with tattoos covering both arms, gave me a cursory nod. The third man, Dave, looked up from where he was examining the wall and walked over. He was lean, maybe late 30s, with watchful eyes that seemed to be assessing me. "David Anderson," he said, wiping dust from his hand before shaking mine. His grip was firm and his gaze direct. "First day, huh?" "Yeah. Just hired yesterday." Something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise, but recognition. "Elysium move fast when they want someone," he said. "You get the full pitch? Great pay, signing bonus, immediate start?" I nodded. Seemed too good to pass up. "Always does," David said, then gestured around the lobby. "We're gutting the first floor today, pulling out all the old fixtures, wiring, anything that's not load-bearing, prepping for the electrical team next week." "Any specific section I should start on?" I asked. Mike pointed toward the east corridor. "Take that wing. We've already cleared the first few rooms, but there's plenty left. Just pile debris near the doors for now, and we'll haul it out to the dumpsters later." I grabbed my tools and headed toward the corridor, passing what had once been a reception desk, now reduced to splintered wood and rusted metal. The east wing contained what looked like former administrative offices, with peeling nameplates still attached to some doors. The floor was littered with broken ceiling tiles, shards of fluorescent lights, and decades of accumulated trash from trespassers. The work itself was straightforward, tearing out rotted drywall, removing old fixtures, and clearing debris. By mid-morning, I'd filled several contractor bags with smaller pieces and created piles of larger debris near the doorway. The physical labor felt good after months of piecing together odd jobs, and knowing each hour meant $38 in my pocket kept me moving at a steady pace. Around noon, I heard new footsteps in the hallway, heavier than the other workers. A man appeared in the doorway of the room I was clearing. He was solidly built, wearing a hard hat and carrying a clipboard, with the stern expression of someone used to giving orders. "Miller?" he asked, checking something on his clipboard. "Yes, sir," I said, setting down the section of metal shelving I'd been removing. "Robert Hayes, site foreman." He barely looked at me, instead scanning the room with a critical eye. "Making good progress. Keep it up." With that, he turned and walked away, his boots echoing down the corridor as he moved on to check the others. The brief interaction left me with an odd feeling, though I couldn't pinpoint why. There was nothing overtly wrong with the man, but something about his demeanor struck me as mechanical, rehearsed. I shook it off and returned to work, breaking only to eat the sandwich I'd packed for lunch. The others gathered in the lobby during their break, but I stayed in my section, wanting to maintain my momentum. Through the broken windows, I could see the hospital grounds stretching toward a line of trees in the distance, the once manicured lawns now overgrown and wild. By mid-afternoon, the physical toll of demolition work began to catch up with me. My muscles ached from the constant tearing, lifting, and hauling. Around 4, I took a water break and ran into Mike and Tony heading toward the exit, tools packed up. "Calling it a day?" I asked, surprised they were leaving so early. "Got our sections done," Mike said. "Hayes doesn't care how long we stay as long as we finish our assigned areas." Tony nodded. "Just don't stay past 7, company policy." Before I could ask about this oddly specific cutoff time, they were gone, leaving me alone with David, who was working in a room further down the corridor. I returned to my section, motivated to finish quickly now that I knew I could leave once my area was complete. The late afternoon light cast long shadows through the broken windows as I continued working. The building grew quieter without the other 2 men, and I became increasingly aware of the sounds around me. The settling of old wood, the occasional skittering of what I hoped were just mice in the walls, and the faint drip of water from somewhere I couldn't pinpoint. By 6, I'd nearly finished my assigned rooms. My arms and back ached, but the prospect of heading home to tell Sarah about the solid first day kept me going. I was bagging up the last of the smaller debris when I heard footsteps approaching. David appeared in the doorway, his tool bag already packed. He looked tired but watchful, his eyes taking in the work I'd done before settling on me. "Finishing up?" he asked. "Almost there," I said, tying off the bag. "You heading out?" He nodded but didn't move to leave. Instead, he glanced down the hallway in both directions, then stepped into the room, closing the distance between us. "How much did they tell you about this place?" he asked, his voice lower than before. The question caught me off guard. "Not much. Just that it's a renovation project, turning the old hospital into office space." David's mouth tightened. "Right." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, holding it for a moment before extending it to me. "You're going to need this." I took the paper but didn't unfold it, watching his face instead. "What is it?" "Rules," he said simply. "For working here." "Rules? Like safety protocols?" I asked, confused by his serious tone. "For surviving," he clarified, his eyes never leaving mine. "Read it before you come back tomorrow. Memorize it." A chill ran through me despite the stuffy air. "What are you talking about?" David looked toward the windows where the late afternoon sun cast orange light across the dusty floor. "Just read it, not here. When you're home." He stepped back, shouldering his tool bag. "And don't stay past 7, ever." He turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. 8 months I've been working for Elysium. 8 months in this place. There's a reason they pay so well, Miller. With that, he walked away. I stood in the half-demolished room, the folded paper heavy in my hand, listening to his footsteps fade down the corridor. I looked down at the paper, tempted to open it immediately, but something in David's warning made me slip it into my pocket instead. I quickly finished bagging the last of the debris, gathered my tools, and headed for the exit. The hospital felt different now, the shadows deeper, the silence more oppressive. I moved quickly through the main lobby, now empty of workers and equipment, except for what would be needed tomorrow. The key card beeped at the side door, and I stepped out into the evening air with relief. As I drove home, the folded paper seemed to burn in my pocket, but I resisted the urge to pull over and read it. Whatever David wanted to tell me, he'd been clear that I should wait until I was home. I tried to rationalize his behavior. Maybe it was some kind of hazing for the new guy, or perhaps he was just messing with me. But the serious look in his eyes suggested otherwise, and as I pulled onto our street, the excitement I'd felt about the job had transformed into unease. Sarah greeted me with a smile when I walked in, Emma running over to hug me. For their sakes, I pushed down my concerns and painted the day in positive terms. Good money, straightforward work, a solid start. After dinner and helping Emma with homework, I finally had a moment alone. I closed the bathroom door, pulled out the folded paper from my pocket, and sat on the edge of the tub to read what rules David Anderson thought I needed to survive working at Riverside State Hospital. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting for Sarah to finish putting Emma to bed. The house was quiet except for the muffled sounds of a bedtime story drifting down the hallway. I pulled out the folded paper David had given me, smoothing it flat against the worn wood of our table. The paper contained a neatly handwritten list with 6 numbered items. 1. Work only between 8 a.m. and 7 p.m. Never arrive early, never stay late. 2. Always work with at least one other person nearby, no exceptions. 3. Do not open locked doors. If a door is locked, it stays locked. 4. Stay on the first floor at all times. The second floor is off limits. 5. Never approach room 283 under any circumstances. 6. If Robert Hayes appears after 6 p.m., or if his eyes look wrong, or if there's blood on his hands, leave immediately without speaking to him. I read through the list twice, then a third time, trying to make sense of it. It had to be some kind of joke or hazing ritual for new guys. Maybe the veterans got a laugh out of watching rookies jump at shadows or make fools of themselves being paranoid about the creepy old building. But the seriousness in David's eyes when he'd handed me the list didn't match the prank theory. He hadn't been smiling or sending knowing looks to the other guys. He'd seemed genuinely concerned, maybe even afraid. I folded the paper and slipped it into my wallet. Whatever game they were playing, I needed this job too badly to get rattled by ghost stories about an abandoned hospital. $38 an hour meant I could catch up on bills and finally stop disappointing my family. A few weird rules weren't going to scare me away. Sarah came into the kitchen, her face softening when she saw me. "Emma wants you to say goodnight." After tucking my daughter in, I returned to find Sarah watching TV. I sat beside her, not mentioning the list or David's warning. Instead, I told her about the straightforward demolition work and how the faster I completed my sections, the sooner I could head home each day. "So, it's going well?" she asked, hope lighting her tired eyes. "Better than expected," I lied. "Simple work, good pay, can't ask for more than that." That night, I dreamed of long hospital corridors and a distant knocking that grew louder with each step I took. I woke before dawn, sheets damp with sweat, the memory of the dream already fading. The next morning, I pulled into the hospital parking lot at exactly 8 o'clock. 4 vehicles were already there: David's sedan, 2 unfamiliar pickup trucks, and a black SUV with tinted windows that hadn't been present yesterday. I grabbed my tool bag and headed for the side entrance. Inside, the main lobby buzzed with activity. David and 2 men I hadn't seen before were sorting through demolition equipment. Pry bars, sledgehammers, bolt cutters. Robert Hayes stood off to one side, checking something on a clipboard. His presence made me think of rule number 6, and I caught myself glancing at his hands. They were clean. "Morning," David said when he spotted me, his expression carefully neutral. "Got assigned to the West Corridor today. You're with us." I nodded and set my tool bag down. "New guys?" I asked, gesturing toward the unfamiliar workers. "Paul and Jeff," David replied. "Started last week." The two men looked up briefly at the mention of their names, both in their 30s, with the weathered look of experienced construction workers. They gave quick nods before returning to their task. Hayes finished whatever he was checking and approached our group. "West Corridor needs to be cleared by end of day," he said flatly. "Work in pairs, pile debris by the service exit. Anderson, you're in charge of this section." With that, he walked away, boots echoing on the tile floor. I watched him go, remembering David's warning. In the daylight, surrounded by other workers, Hayes seemed normal enough, brusque and businesslike, but nothing sinister. "Let's get started," David said, picking up a sledgehammer. He paused, meeting my eyes. "You read what I gave you?" I reached into my back pocket where I'd transferred the list from my wallet. "Yeah, about that." "Not here," he cut me off. "Just follow them." Before I could press further, he turned away and headed toward the West Corridor with Paul following him. Jeff gave me an expectant look, and I grabbed my tool belt and a pry bar. The West Corridor contained what looked like former administrative offices similar to the East Wing I'd worked on yesterday. We split into pairs, David and Paul taking the rooms at the far end, Jeff and I starting near the lobby. For the next 2 hours, we worked methodically, tearing out rotted drywall and piling debris near the doorways. Jeff wasn't much for conversation, answering my attempts at small talk with grunts or one-word responses. The work proceeded smoothly, the mundane task of demolition making David's rules seem increasingly absurd. Around 10 o'clock, I was prying baseboard from a wall when I heard it. A faint but distinct knocking sound coming from somewhere above us. I paused, listening. 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more. "You hear that?" I asked Jeff. He looked up from where he was bagging smaller debris. "Hear what?" I waited, but the sound didn't repeat. "Nothing," I said. "Must be the old pipe settling." We returned to work, but a few minutes later the knocking came again, louder this time. I set down my pry bar and stepped into the hallway, looking up at the ceiling. The sound was definitely coming from the second floor. Jeff appeared in the doorway behind me. "What are you doing?" "That knocking," I said. "You really don't hear it?" He shook his head, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I'm going to get more bags from the supply room," he said, leaving me alone in the corridor. The knocking continued, more insistent now. My curiosity outweighed my caution. I headed toward the central staircase, passing David and Paul working in one of the far rooms. David looked up as I walked by, his eyes narrowing when he saw my direction. "Miller," he called after me. "Where are you going?" "Just checking something," I replied, not slowing down. "Be right back." I reached the stairwell and hesitated, remembering rule number 4. Stay on the first floor at all times. The knocking sounded again, and I put my foot on the first step. The stairs were concrete, cracked in places but solid enough. They led to a landing with a heavy metal door that stood partially open. I pushed through it onto the second floor. The hallway before me stretched in both directions, lined with doors spaced at regular intervals. Unlike the first floor with its administrative offices, this was clearly a patient wing. Small metal plates with numbers identified each room, though years of neglect had left many hanging at odd angles. The knocking had stopped when I entered the second floor, but now it started again, coming from my right. I moved down the hallway, past empty rooms with stripped beds and decaying nightstands. The carpet beneath my boots was threadbare, pulpy with moisture in spots. As I walked, the knocking grew clearer, more defined. It was coming from a room ahead, the rhythm changing from 3 even knocks to something more frantic, more urgent. I counted the room numbers as I passed: 276, 278, 280. The knocking intensified, and now I could hear something else, a scratching sound like fingernails dragging across wood. It was coming from room 283. I stopped several feet from the door, suddenly remembering rule number 5. Never approach room 283 under any circumstances. The door to room 283 looked like all the others, solid wood with a small window reinforced with wire mesh. The glass was filthy, making it impossible to see inside. The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by that horrible scratching sound, faster now, more desperate. A feeling I'd never experienced before washed over me. Not simple fear, but a wave of pure terror that started at the base of my spine and flooded upward, turning my muscles to water and filling my mouth with a metallic taste. My legs went weak, and I reached out to steady myself against the wall. The scratching stopped. A profound silence fell, more terrible than any noise. Then a soft thump sounded against the door, as if something heavy had pressed against it from the inside. My paralysis broke. I turned and ran, not caring how it looked or what the others might think. I flew down the hallway, burst through the stairwell door, and took the steps 2 at a time, my tool belt slapping against my leg. I stumbled into the first-floor corridor, gasping for breath. David stood waiting, arms crossed over his chest, a knowing expression on his face. Behind him, Paul and Jeff had stopped working and were watching me with wary eyes. "Rule 4, David said quietly. "Stay on the first floor." I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. "What the hell is in that room? Room 283? David glanced at the other 2 workers, who quickly resumed their tasks, then back to me. "This building has been abandoned for 20 years, Miller," he said, his voice low but clear. "All the doors are supposed to be empty." I stared at him, the implication of his words sinking in. If the building had been abandoned for 20 years, then whatever had been knocking, whatever had scratched at that door, shouldn't exist. I kept my head down and focused on the work in front of me, methodically stripping copper wiring from the exposed walls of what had once been a staff break room. After yesterday's experience upstairs, after what I'd heard at room 283, I wasn't taking any chances. I stayed close to David, who worked silently beside me, his movements efficient, but his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. The rules made sense now, not as some prank or hazing ritual, but as survival guidelines that I should have heeded without question. "Hand me the wire cutters," David said, reaching out without looking away from the electrical panel he was dismantling. I passed them over, noting how the skin on my knuckles had already split from the day's work. My hands would be calloused again soon, the way they used to be when I worked construction full-time. "You doing okay?" David asked, his voice low enough that Paul and Jeff, working across the room, couldn't hear. "Fine," I replied, though we both knew it was a lie. Neither of us had mentioned my trip to the second floor yesterday. David hadn't asked what I'd seen or heard, and I hadn't volunteered the information. Some things were better left unspoken, but the scratching sound from behind that door played on repeat in my mind, along with the heavy thump against the wood. Paul and Jeff kept to themselves, exchanging few words even with each other. I wondered if they'd learned the rules the hard way too, or if David had taken them aside and given them the same list he'd given me. The 4 of us worked in pairs as we moved through the West Wing, systematically tearing out anything of value before the walls themselves would come down. The afternoon light filtering through the grimy windows cast long shadows across the debris-strewn floor. I checked my watch, just past 3. 4 more hours until the cutoff time when we needed to be gone. "How long have you been working here?" I asked David during a water break, keeping my voice casual. He took a long drink before answering. 8 months. The information landed like a stone. 8 months in this place, following those rules, never staying past 7, never going upstairs. "And you've never," I began. We should get back to work. He cut me off, capping his water bottle. Let's finish the electrical in the next room. I followed him down the corridor to a former office where more copper wiring needed extraction. The hospital had been built in an era when copper was used extensively, making it valuable salvage despite the decades of neglect. Every foot of wiring we pulled from the walls represented profit for Elysium Construction, though I was beginning to suspect that salvage wasn't their primary business. Around 4 o'clock, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Heavier than any of the workers, with a measured pace that I'd already learned to recognize. Robert Hayes appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, surveying our progress with cool detachment. Something about him was different today. His movements seemed more deliberate, as if each gesture required conscious thought. He stood watching us work for nearly a minute without speaking, his gaze lingering on each of us a beat too long. "Acceptable progress," he finally said, making a note on his clipboard. I kept working, pulling wire from the wall, but I could feel his eyes on me. When I glanced up, he was staring directly at me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "Miller," he said, "make sure you clean up properly when you finish. No loose ends." "Yes, sir," I replied, focusing on the wire in my hands. He turned and left, his boots echoing down the hallway. Only when the sound had faded did I look up at David, who had stopped working and was watching the door. "Did you notice his hands?" I asked quietly. David nodded, returning to the panel he was disassembling. Rule 6. I thought about what I'd seen. Dark stains on Hayes' fingers and palms that looked disturbingly like dried blood. Not fresh, but unmistakable. Combined with his unnatural manner, it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. We worked steadily for the next hour, making good progress through the assigned rooms. At 5 o'clock, Paul packed up his tools and nodded to Jeff. "We're heading out," Paul said to David. "Got our sections done." David checked his watch. "Smart move, we'll wrap up soon too." They left without another word, their footsteps fading toward the main entrance. The building seemed suddenly larger, emptier without them. "You should go too," I told David, looking at the last section of my assigned area. "I've only got about 30 more minutes of work here." David hesitated, glancing at his watch again. "The rules say not to work alone." "It's barely past 5, I said. "I'll be out by 6, latest. That's a full hour before the cutoff." He looked uncomfortable, but nodded slowly. "Just make sure you're out of here by 6:30. No exceptions." "I promise," I said. "I just want to get this section done so we can move to a new area tomorrow." David packed his tools methodically, his movements deliberate. At the doorway, he paused. "Call me when you get home," he said, then added, "And Miller, don't break the rules again." After he left, the silence of the building settled around me like a physical weight. For the first time, I was alone in Riverside State Hospital, and the awareness of that fact pressed against my consciousness as I continued pulling copper wire from the walls. I worked faster now, eager to finish and leave. The light outside the windows was beginning to fade, the golden late afternoon sunlight giving way to the cooler tones of early evening. I checked my watch. Nearly 6. Just a few more minutes, and I'd be done. The work was meditative in its repetitiveness. Cut, strip, coil, repeat. I fell into a rhythm, focusing entirely on the task at hand, pushing away thoughts of room 283 and whatever lurked inside it. This was just a job, I told myself. A well-paying job that would get my family out of financial trouble. Nothing more. I was coiling the last length of salvaged wire when I glanced at my watch again. 6:42. I'd lost track of time, staying much later than I'd promised David. The realization sent a jolt of adrenaline through me, and I quickly gathered my tools, shoving them into my bag with none of my usual care. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps in the main hallway, moving with deliberate slowness toward my location. I froze, listening. The cadence was familiar, but something about it was wrong, the timing between steps slightly off, as if the walker was having to consciously remember how to walk. I slung my tool bag over my shoulder and moved toward the door, intending to slip out and head for the exit. But as I reached the doorway, a figure appeared, blocking my path. Robert Hayes stood there, but the man before me seemed fundamentally different from the site foreman I'd met on my first day. His posture was rigid, his head tilted at an unnatural angle, but it was his eyes that stopped my breath. They looked wrong, almost black, as if the pupils had expanded to fill the entire iris. Fresh blood covered his hands and forearms, glistening wetly in the fading light. It dripped slowly from his fingertips onto the dusty floor. He smiled, a movement of lips that didn't reach those horrible eyes. "Miller," he said, his voice oddly flat. "Working alone?" I tightened my grip on my tool bag, fighting the urge to run. Running seemed like the worst possible response, like it might trigger something predatory in whatever was wearing Hayes' skin. "Just finishing up," I managed to say, my voice steadier than I expected. "Heading out now." He took a step forward, and I instinctively backed up. "The rules are important, Miller," he said, still smiling that empty smile. "Very important." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry. Lost track of time." Another step forward, another step back for me. "Good workers know the rules," he said, the blood on his hands now dripping more steadily. "You should be more careful about staying late. Bad things happen after hours." My back hit the wall. Hayes stood between me and the only door, still smiling that terrible smile. I clutched my tool bag to my chest like a shield, though I knew it would offer no protection if he, or it, decided to attack. "I'm leaving right now," I said, sidling along the wall toward the door. "Won't happen again." Hayes didn't move to stop me, just turned his head to track my movement, that unnatural smile still fixed on his face. "See that it doesn't, Miller. We'd hate to lose you." I slipped past him, half expecting to feel those blood-covered hands grab me, but he remained still, only turning to watch as I backed down the hallway toward the main entrance. "Good night, Miller," he called after me, his voice echoing in the empty corridor. "Sleep well." I didn't respond, just turned and walked as quickly as I could without breaking into a run. The keycard reader beeped at the side entrance, and I burst out into the evening air, gulping it down like I'd been underwater. My truck was the only vehicle left in the parking lot. I threw my tool bag in the passenger seat and started the engine, backing out so quickly I nearly hit the fence. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw a figure standing at the side entrance, watching me leave. Hayes, or whatever was wearing his form, silhouetted against the light from inside. My hands shook on the steering wheel as I drove, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Riverside State Hospital. When I reached the highway, I pulled over at a gas station and sat in my idling truck, trying to control my breathing. I pulled out my phone and called David, needing answers more than I needed comfort. He answered on the second ring. "Miller, you make it out okay?" "What the hell is really happening at that place?" I asked, my voice cracking. "What is wrong with Hayes? What's in room 283? There was a long pause before David spoke again, his voice carefully measured. "Not over the phone. Meet me tomorrow morning before work. The diner on Klein Avenue in Hammond, 6 a.m. I'll tell you what I know." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my truck, staring at the phone in my hand. The image of Hayes' blood-covered hands and that horrible smile burned into my mind. Whatever Elysium Construction was paying me, it wasn't enough. But I had a sinking feeling that quitting wasn't going to be an option. I arrived at the Sunrise Diner at 5:45, beating the morning rush, but still finding several booths occupied by shift workers and truckers. The place smelled of bacon and burnt coffee, a comforting normalcy after what I'd witnessed yesterday. I chose a booth with a clear view of the door and ordered coffee, My hands still not entirely steady. David walked in at 6 on the dot, scanning the room before spotting me. He looked tired with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he hadn't slept much. He slid into the booth across from me without removing his jacket. "You look like hell," he said, waving away the menu the waitress offered. "Just coffee," he told her, then waited until she walked away before speaking again. "You saw Hayes yesterday?" I nodded, wrapping my hands around my mug for warmth. His eyes were wrong, and the blood. "Yeah." David stared into his coffee when it arrived. "That happens sometimes, usually after 6. "What the hell is going on, David? What is that place? And what's in room 283? The questions tumbled out, my voice barely above a whisper despite the clattering dishes and conversation around us. David leaned forward. "Elysium isn't renovating that hospital, at least not in the way you think." "Then what are they doing?" "I've been there 8 months. Started just like you, desperate for work, jumped at the pay without asking enough questions." He took a sip of coffee. "Took me about 3 weeks to realize something was wrong. People would disappear from the job site. No explanation, no goodbye, just gone. And new guys would show up to replace them. I thought about Paul and Jeff, how little they spoke, how they kept to themselves. The workers who disappeared, they broke the rules?" David nodded. "Most of them. Some got curious about the second floor. Others stayed too late. A few tried asking too many questions to the wrong people. Is that why you gave me the list? To keep me from disappearing too? I try to help the new guys when I can." He glanced toward the window, watching the early morning traffic. "Elysium targets people like us. Guys who need money bad enough not to ask questions. Guys with families to support. Bills piling up. But what's the point? What are they actually doing there?" David's expression darkened. "I've pieced together what I can. The hospital closed in the 80s after a series of patient deaths. Suicides, accidents, some unexplained. But the stories go back further. There were always rumors about that place, even when it was operating." The waitress returned to refill our cups, and we fell silent until she moved on. 3 years ago," David continued, "Elysium bought the property through a shell company. They're not in construction." "Not really. I checked. They have no other projects, no history of renovation work. Whatever they're doing at Riverside, it's their only business." I thought about the stains on Hayes's hands, his unnatural movements, those black eyes. Is Hayes human? David's mouth tightened. Sometimes. The simple answer sent a chill through me. What does that mean? It means exactly what I wrote in Rule 6. If you see Hayes after 6 p.m., or if his eyes look wrong, or if there's blood on his hands, you get out immediately. Something uses him sometimes. Same with some of the other supervisors. I took a long drink of my coffee, wishing it was something stronger. Why are you still working there? Why not just quit? David pulled out his wallet and removed a folded document, sliding it across the table. Page 4, Section 12 of our employment contract. I unfolded it and read the indicated section. Employee agrees to provide no less than 6 months written notice prior to voluntary termination of employment. Early termination will result in forfeiture of all earned wages and a contractual penalty of $50,000, payable immediately to Elysium Construction. Jesus, I muttered. $50,000? Plus all the money you've already earned. David took the paper back. I have a wife and 2 kids. Mortgage, car payment, medical bills. I can't afford to lose everything. That can't be legal. Maybe not, but are you ready to hire a lawyer and find out? Because I'm not. I understood then. We were trapped, not just by whatever supernatural force existed in the hospital, but by the very human evil of a predatory contract designed to keep desperate men working in dangerous conditions. "We should get going," David said, checking his watch. "Can't be late." I left enough cash on the table to cover both coffees, and we walked out into the cool morning air. David paused at his car. "One more thing," he said. "Hayes won't remember what happened yesterday. He never does, after episodes, so don't mention it." I nodded, though the thought of facing Hayes again made my stomach turn. "Follow the rules, Miller," David said as he got into his car, "and maybe we both make it through this." I arrived at Riverside State Hospital at exactly 8 o'clock. The parking lot had more vehicles than usual, including a sleek black SUV with tinted windows that hadn't been there yesterday. David's sedan was missing. My gut tightened as I walked toward the entrance, scanning the lot again to make sure I hadn't missed his car. After our meeting at the diner, I'd expected him to be waiting, ready to guide me through another day in this nightmare. I swiped my keycard at the side entrance, the metal door clicking open to admit me into the hospital's musty interior. The usual sounds of demolition work were absent. No sledgehammers against drywall, no voices calling back and forth, just an unnatural quiet that made the hair on my arms stand up. I found the source of that quiet when I reached the main lobby. 2 men in dark slacks and button-up shirts sat at a folding table, both intently focused on laptop screens. Neither wore construction clothes. One had salt and pepper hair cropped close to his scalp. The other was younger with wire-rimmed glasses. Both looked up as I entered, their expressions neutral. "Miller," the older one said, not a question, but a confirmation. "Right on time." I set my tool bag down, looking around for any sign of the other workers. "Where is everyone?" "Reassigned to different sections," the younger supervisor said, turning his laptop slightly so I couldn't see the screen. "You'll be working alone today." Working alone. A direct violation of Rule 2. "Where's David Anderson?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. The 2 men exchanged a brief glance before the older one replied. "Mr. Anderson is no longer with Elysium Construction. He violated the terms of his contract." My mouth went dry. "What terms?" "That's confidential personnel information," he said, his tone making it clear the subject was closed. "You'll be continuing the electrical salvage in the East Wing today. Section E, rooms 12 through 20. The younger supervisor handed me a printed floor plan with my work area highlighted in yellow. I took it, noticing how clean and smooth his hands were. Not the hands of someone who did physical labor. "What about Rule 2? I asked. Both men stared at me. "The buddy system," I clarified, though I knew they understood. "David said we should always work with someone else nearby." "That's a general safety guideline," the older one said, his voice flat. "Not applicable in all situations. The work in Section E is straightforward. You'll be fine on your own." I wanted to press them, to ask what really happened to David, but something in their cold stares warned me against it. I picked up my tool bag. "Robert Hayes will check your progress at lunch," the younger one added as I turned to leave. "Make sure you're making good time." I nodded and headed for the East Wing, my mind racing. David was gone, and these men, clearly not construction supervisors, knew about the rules but dismissed them as safety guidelines. Whatever had happened to David, they either knew about it or had caused it. The East Wing was indeed empty when I arrived, the long corridor of former patient rooms silent and still. I set up my workstation in room 12 as instructed, laying out my tools with mechanical precision while my thoughts churned. David had warned me people disappeared from this job site. Now he was gone too. I worked methodically through the morning, stripping wiring from walls and collecting it in neat coils, but my mind wasn't on the task. Every few minutes I checked my watch, counting down the hours until I could leave. The contract penalty for quitting was steep, $50,000 plus forfeiture of wages, but maybe it was worth it to get away from whatever was happening here. Around 10, I ventured back toward the main lobby under the pretense of getting water from the cooler Elysium had set up for workers. The supervisors were still there, both focused on their screens, talking in low voices. I caught fragments as I approached. Third time this month. Containment protocols? Increased activity in the east sector. They fell silent when they noticed me. I filled my water bottle, nodded to them, and returned to my work area, more uneasy than before. By 11, I'd finished 2 rooms and moved into the corridor to begin on the next. That's when I noticed the stairwell door at the end of the hall was ajar. It led to the second floor, the floor we were expressly forbidden from visiting according to Rule 4. I approached cautiously, telling myself I was just going to close it. But as I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A familiar red toolbox sitting on the floor beside the stairwell. David's toolbox. I looked around to make sure I was alone, then knelt beside it. The toolbox was open, tools arranged neatly inside. David had always been meticulous about his equipment. Beside it lay something small and metallic that caught the dim light. I picked it up. A gold wedding band. I remembered David at the diner, twisting it absently as he spoke about his wife and kids. I stood up quickly, pocketing the ring. There was no scenario where David would voluntarily leave his wedding ring or his tools behind. Whatever had happened to him, it wasn't a simple contract termination. The stairwell door creaked slightly on its hinges, as if inviting me to investigate further. I remembered my previous trip to the second floor, the sounds from room 283, and stepped back. No way was I going up there again. I returned to my assigned rooms and worked with mechanical efficiency, trying to process what I'd found. David was gone, and his disappearance was connected to that stairwell, to the second floor. The supervisors were lying about him violating his contract. Something had happened to him. Something bad. At noon, I heard the heavy footsteps of Robert Hayes coming down the hall. My heart raced as I remembered our last encounter, his black eyes, the blood on his hands, that unnatural smile. But when he appeared in the doorway, he looked normal, clipboard in hand, face set in its usual stern expression. "Making good progress, Miller," he said, checking something off on his clipboard. "Keep this pace, and you'll finish the section by 4. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He showed no sign of recognizing our encounter from the night before, just as David had predicted. Hayes left, and I exhaled slowly. As his footsteps faded, I heard something else, a voice, faint but distinct, coming from above. "Help. Please. Miller, help me." It was David's voice, coming from the second floor. I froze, listening. The voice came again, more desperate this time. "Miller, I'm hurt. Please help me." Every instinct told me to run upstairs, to find David and help him. But then I remembered Rule 5, never approach room 283, and what David had told me about the hospital, about things that weren't human. This wasn't David calling me. It couldn't be. Whatever was up there was trying to lure me upstairs, using his voice as bait. I turned back to my work, my hands shaking as I stripped another length of copper wire. The voice continued, growing more frantic, more pleading, until it finally faded away around 1 o'clock. When I went to the lobby for more water, I found the supervisors packing up their laptops. "We're heading out," the older one told me. "Hayes will lock up when you're done." "You're leaving?" I asked, surprised. "Got what we needed," the younger one said, closing his laptop case. "You can go at 4 if your section is done." They left without another word, the main entrance closing behind them with a heavy thud that echoed through the empty building. I checked my watch. 2 o'clock. It struck me then that this might be my only chance. The supervisors were gone. Hayes was somewhere else in the building. I was alone with whatever secrets Elysium was hiding. I pulled out my phone and began taking pictures. The lobby first, focusing on the table where the supervisors had set up their equipment. There were still cables connected to what looked like monitoring devices mounted high in the corners of the room. Security cameras? Something else? I moved through the building quickly, photographing everything that looked suspicious or out of place. In a former nurse's station, I found a modern fingerprint scanner next to a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." It hadn't been there yesterday. Taking a chance, I pressed my thumb to the scanner. To my surprise, the light turned green, and the door unlocked with a soft click. I pushed it open to find a narrow staircase leading down to the basement. The stairs ended in a long corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. At the end was a metal door with another scanner. Again, my thumbprint worked. The door opened into what could only be described as a server room. Racks of equipment humming softly, lights blinking in the semi-darkness. This was no temporary setup for a demolition crew. This was a permanent installation, and it looked new. A computer workstation sat in the corner, its screen showing a login prompt. On a hunch, I tried Miller as the username, and the system logged me in immediately. No password required. What I found made my skin crawl. Folders labeled by date going back 3 years, to when David said Elysium had purchased the property. I clicked on the most recent folder, dated yesterday. Video files filled the screen. I clicked one at random and found myself watching security footage of the West Wing corridor. The timestamp showed 7:30 p.m., after everyone should have left. The corridor was empty at first. Then a figure appeared, David walking quickly toward the main entrance with his tool bag over his shoulder. He looked nervous, checking behind him every few steps. Then something moved at the far end of the corridor. A shadow at first, formless and shifting. But as it approached David, it took shape. Robert Hayes, but moving all wrong, his gait jerky and unnatural. David began running, but Hayes, or whatever was wearing his form, moved with impossible speed, overtaking him in seconds. The struggle was brief. David fought hard, but Hayes was inhumanly strong, dragging him toward the stairwell. The last image showed Hayes forcing David up the stairs toward the second floor, toward room 283. I felt sick, but kept searching, opening file after file, document after document. Elysium wasn't a construction company. It was a research organization studying whatever supernatural force existed in Riverside State Hospital. The files contained detailed logs of incidents, manifestations, and subject exposures. They had been documenting what happened when workers encountered the entities in the building. They knew about room 283. They knew what happened to people who broke the rules. They weren't trying to prevent it. They were studying it. I found a USB drive in my pocket and copied as many files as I could, my hands shaking with rage and fear. These people had deliberately put us in danger, had watched as whatever inhabited this place took worker after worker, all for their research. As the files copied, I looked through more documents. One caught my eye, a personnel file with my name on it. I opened it to find detailed background information about me, including my financial struggles, my family situation, even my work history. They had targeted me specifically because I was desperate enough to take the job without asking questions. The file transfer completed, and I pulled the USB drive free, tucking it securely in my pocket. This was evidence. Evidence that could expose Elysium, could stop them from sending more desperate men into this death trap. I turned to leave and froze. Robert Hayes stood in the doorway, blocking my exit. His eyes were wrong again, black and empty, and fresh blood coated his hands, dripping onto the concrete floor. "Miller," he said, his voice a terrible approximation of human speech. "Accessing restricted areas is a violation of your contract." I backed away, looking for another exit, but there was none. I was trapped in the basement with whatever entity had taken Hayes's body. But something had changed in me. The fear was still there, but it was overshadowed by anger. I thought of David being dragged to room 283. of all the other workers who had disappeared, of Elysium knowingly sending us into danger. "What happened to David?" I demanded, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Hayes's head tilted at an unnatural angle, that horrible smile spreading across his face. "David Anderson attempted to terminate his employment prematurely. That has consequences." "What are you?" I asked, gripping the edge of the desk behind me. The thing wearing Hayes's face laughed, a sound like stone grinding against stone. "I am what has always been here, Miller. Long before the hospital, long before this land had a name. And now David Anderson feeds me, just like all the others who tried to leave. Feeds you." "Fear first," it said, taking a step closer. "Then pain. Then everything else. Elysium understands our arrangement. They provide the meals and I provide the knowledge." I glanced at the server equipment, at the years of research Elysium had compiled. Whatever this thing was, they were working with it, studying it, feeding it. "You won't get away with this," I said. "People know I'm here. They'll come looking." "Many have said that," it replied, its voice now a twisted blend of Hayes's and something much older. "None were missed for long. Your kind forgets so easily." It took another step toward me. I grabbed a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall and swung it hard, not at Hayes but at the nearest server rack. The metal casing dented, sparks flew, and alarms began to wail. "No!" the thing wearing Hayes screamed, lunging for me. I dodged, swinging the extinguisher again and again at the equipment, destroying as much as I could. Monitors shattered, hard drives cracked, years of research disappeared in seconds. The entity howled with rage, a sound no human throat could make. I ran for the door, shoving past it, feeling ice-cold hands grasp at my jacket but slip away. I sprinted up the basement stairs, through the hospital corridors, not looking back, even when I heard it coming after me, its footsteps erratic and fast. The side entrance beeped as my keycard registered, and I burst out into the late afternoon sunlight. My truck was the only vehicle left in the lot. I fumbled with my keys, dropping them once before managing to unlock the door and start the engine. As I reversed out of the parking space, I saw Hayes emerge from the building, standing perfectly still, watching me leave. Only when I reached the highway did I pull over, hands shaking too badly to drive safely. The USB drive felt heavy in my pocket. Evidence. Proof of what Elysium was doing. Proof of what happened to David and the others. But I wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Elysium had my information, knew where I lived, knew about Sarah and Emma, and the contract. $50,000 if I quit. They would come for me. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. I had to get home, had to grab Sarah and Emma and whatever we could carry, had to run before Elysium realized what I'd taken, what I knew. I pulled back onto the highway, pushing my truck as fast as it would go, watching the rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit. The hospital disappeared behind me, but I knew its darkness would follow.